Chapter 35. A night in a motel. The diner was passable. At least Zach wasn't hungry anymore, and Brandi and Zach had had a great conversation about everything. He marveled at how smart she was, and that her father didn't see her value. It was a shame, but it was his benefit. He'd keep Brandi on when all of this was over. She was a great employee, and frankly, he didn't want to let her go for other reasons. Spending this time with her cemented in his mind that he had feelings for Brandi. Whether he wanted them or not, they were there. The diner was all alone on the road, and he would have preferred a much more romantic setting so they could go for a walk, but that was not to be. He helped Brandi into the truck, having realized just how tall it was for her. She smiled down at him, and it warmed him all over. Some places more than others. "Thanks," she said. He rested his hand on the door. "I'm sorry, I didn't notice you were struggling. You were on the other side of the truck." "No excuse," Zach said. "You are truly a gentleman." "You are a lady, Brandi. Thank you for letting me be a gentleman to you." She laughed. "I'm betting some women you've been with haven't." He grimaced. "No, they haven't, and my mother raised me to be this way. I couldn't turn it off if I wanted to." Brandi yawned. He patted her leg. "Let's get you back to the motel." Zach pulled into the motel parking lot as a police car pulled out. He glanced at Brandi, wondering if she noticed. That wasn't a good sign. The place probably wasn't safe, and he wouldn't get much sleep tonight. When they walked into the motel room, the beds suddenly seemed a lot closer together. He'd been sleeping down the hall from Brandi for weeks, but now she was going to be mere feet away. His mouth went dry, but he chanted to himself that he was a grown man who could control himself. "You want to use the bathroom first?" She nodded and gathered some things and disappeared into the bathroom. While she did that, Zach put a chair under the doorknob. He didn't want to scare Brandi, but he was concerned about the other clientele in the motel. Brandi came out in a large t-shirt, and Zach's mouth went dry. How could she make that look that sexy? It covered all of her, but it was just as tantalizing to him as it would be if he could see through it. "Your turn." "Thanks." Zach jumped into a cold shower to get his mind off of Brandi, who was just outside the bathroom. "I can do this." She'd said no sex, but the contract hadn't been signed. No, he would not take advantage of Brandi. When he left the bathroom, she was under the covers, her breathing steady. He was glad the temptation had been taken away from him as he crawled under the covers himself. A scream woke Zach a few hours later. He could see Brandi sitting up in bed. "Did you hear that?" she said. "I heard something. Let me investigate." "No, Zach. Don't go out there." A woman screamed. "I'll just look out the window." Zach couldn't see anything, and no one else screamed. He didn't see any police cars or any people in the parking lot. Maybe someone had a bad dream. Zach turned on the lamp next to his bed, highlighting Brandi in an orange glow. She held the covers up to her as if they were a shield. "You okay?" he asked. "No, Zach. I'm afraid." "Well, we can't do anything until the plane is fixed." "I know." As much as he didn't think it was a good idea, he pulled the covers back on his bed. "Would you like to sleep with me? No strings. I can move all the way on the other side of the bed." Not that that would create much distance between them. To his surprise, she nodded and climbed into his bed. Zach had never slept with a woman platonically, but this was Brandi. She was frightened, and it was just the same as if she'd been drunk. He wouldn't take advantage of her. "You don't have to hug the edge of the bed, Zach." "Thanks. My butt was hanging off." Zach wasn't sure how he was going to sleep with Brandi this close. Her scent filled his nostrils, and he rolled over to face the other way, or she would know what he was thinking. Her breathing steadied, and Zach could let out the breath he'd been holding. He eventually fell into sleep, and when he woke up, it took him a minute to orient himself. A soft woman's arm was around his waist. He'd never slept the whole night with a woman in a platonic way, so he was tempted to jump out of bed, but then he realized it was Brandi. He listened, and she was still asleep, a soft snore emanating from her. He didn't think he could slide out from under, and when he moved, her grip tightened around him. What a pickle. She was going to wake up and be mortified. Her snoring stopped. He held his breath as her arm slid off of him. He would pretend to be asleep until she moved away. "You're awake, aren't you?" she asked. "Yes. I'm sorry. I got cold during the night. I guess I gravitated towards your warmth." "No harm, Brandi. Could you look at me?" No, he couldn't. She would see exactly what he thought of her arm across his body. No. Oh. She didn't fly out of bed as he expected. Instead, she snuggled closer, her arm going back over his hip. "That's not a good idea, Brandi." "I think it is." Are you fully awake? She sat up and looked over his shoulder at him. Yes, I'm awake, Zach. And I know what I want. He rolled onto his back. Say stop now and I'll get out of this bed. Or we'll be here until checkout. He looked at the clock on the nightstand. Which is 3 hours from now. An eyebrow cocked up on her face. 3 hours? Yes. I need a little recovery time in between, but not much, Zach said. A small gasp came out of her. Recovery? Between? Yes, Brandi. We'll be doing this more than once. Her mouth fell open. Last chance to say no, Brandi. I won't be mad. Her answer was obvious when she leaned in to kiss him, but it wasn't a sweet kiss. Brandi knew what she was doing and Zach was momentarily taken off guard. She'd kissed him in the past, but this spoke of dirty things he wouldn't do in his mother's house. In a motel, all bets were off. He rolled over and settled himself between her legs. I have 3 condoms in my wallet. You were optimistic about this trip. He chuckled. I'm always optimistic, but they are always in my wallet. She cocked her head. Thank you for being honest. Now let's put them to good. Chapter 36, Meeting Mom. Brandi turned on the shower in the motel, her body nicely sore from the workout she'd had. Zach was a creative lover. The door to the bathroom swung open. Zach leaned on the door jamb, a foil packet in his hand. There's one more. Brandi laughed. She couldn't help it. You haven't had enough of me? He stalked toward her, his eyes dark with passion. I don't think I could ever have enough of you. Brandi's mouth went dry. No one had ever wanted her this much, or was it just his erection talking? He backed her into the sink and kissed her as if he meant it. Her body came alive. The water's hot. Yes. She stepped into the tub and Zach followed her in. She's expected him to take her then, but he soaked her up then washed her hair. No one had ever been this tender with her. She took it in, knowing this relationship had an expiration date. Before she could offer to wash him, Zach rolled on the last condom and scooped her up. She wrapped her legs around his waist as he leaned her against the wall. She hadn't been sure at first that she could take his whole length, but she did. He once again buried himself in her all the way. He filled her in ways that were more than physical, and she'd miss him when this ended. For now she'd enjoy what she could. She'd take what he'd give her and return the favor. Her nails dug into his back as he brought her to climax, yet again. She'd lost count of how many and hadn't known that a man could be this good in bed. Or in the shower. Her chest heaved as she recovered. He let go of her legs and they finished the shower in silence. There were no words to describe what he felt. When they were dressed and back in the truck, Zach said, "The plane is fixed. We can get on our way. We still need to talk about our stories. Your mother will want to know how we met, and how you asked me to marry you." True. She's a smart woman. We also have to be obvious about our affection for each other. That wouldn't be a hardship. She liked touching Zach probably more than she should. How had her heart betrayed her so easily? She'd kept most men at bay, but Zach had gotten himself into her soul. Yes. Are you okay with this? I am, Zach. I'm just a little tired. He smirked then looked away. Sorry. Don't be. It was a good time. The plane took off without any trouble and landed at an airport not far from his mother's house. Zach had rented a car, and they drove into a gated community. Your mother lives here? Brandi asked. Yeah. I wanted her to be safe if I couldn't be close. She insisted she wanted to be near the beach. It is nice. Warm. Sunny too, Zach said. She looked around at the palm trees and green grass. It appealed to her even though she'd lived close to the city all of her life. It's nice. He pulled into a brick driveway with a house with a matching facade. Flower pots hung from the long porch, overflowing with colors. Zach climbed out as the front door opened. A woman dressed in jeans and a colorful blouse ran into Zach's arms. She didn't look old enough to be his mother. Zachary. Mom. He held her with a reverence that floored Brandi. It was how he'd held her just this morning. Was there more behind Zach's feelings than just wanting to take down her father? Did he feel something for Brandi? She shook off the thought. No, she couldn't think that way. Her heart would get broken. This is Brandi. Brandi, this is my mom. Call me Emma, she said and strode around the car to pull Brandi into a hug. I'm so glad to meet you. Me too. She tugged on Brandi's hand. Come in. I'll have lunch ready in a few minutes. We could have gone out, Zach said. We had this conversation, Zachary, his mother said. Zach closed his mouth and Brandi wanted to laugh. Even a titan of industry had to listen to his mother. Emma let them into her house. It had a 2-story foyer with rooms off either side. They ended up in a kitchen with a peninsula. Sit. Something to drink? I have lemonade or sweet tea. Water is fine for me, Brandi said, admiring the airiness of the kitchen. Lemonade, please, Mom. Zach sat on the stool next to Brandi as his mother flitted about the kitchen. She wasn't a large woman, so Brandi figured Zach's father had been tall. We can eat lunch outside. It is a beautiful day, Emma said. That would be nice, Brandi said. Zachary, while I'm finishing up, put your suitcases in the bonus room. There was no question that they would sleep together in the same room. Brandi hadn't thought about it, but it would make the most sense. Lunch was delicious and Emma took them on a quick tour of the neighborhood afterward, giving stories about the families in each house. Brandi found Emma to be warm, and she had a better understanding of Zach because of his mother. Later, when they were getting ready for bed, Brandi commented to Zach. I get you now. What does that mean? He asked, stopping with his shirt off. His beauty took away her breath. Zach was a magnificent specimen of a man and she almost lost her train of thought. She shook herself. I can see why you are how you are. Your mother is such a wonderful person. Of course, she would raise you to be a gentleman. He smirked. I wasn't one this morning. She laughed. You are a very considerate lover, so yes, I'd say it all spills over into your lovemaking. He blinked. I'm going to take that as a compliment. I meant it as one. You want to use the bathroom first? He asked. Yes. As much as they'd been intimate 3 times, brushing her teeth in front of Zach was pushing it. When Brandi left the bathroom, he used it. They'd stopped for more condoms, so she knew what her night was going to be like. When Zach returned, he wore only pajama bottoms and he stared down at her under the covers. Sleep. Is that what you want? She asked. He turned off the light and showed Brandi exactly what he wanted. Chapter 37, Zach's Double Cross. As soon as Brandi woke up, she knew that Zach was gone. She didn't know exactly how she knew, but she did. She sighed, assessing the situation. He'd made love to her until she was exhausted. Looking at the clock, she'd slept later than she's had in a long time. Brandi rose, showered, and found Emma cooking breakfast. He's gone, isn't he? Zach. Emma. Please don't treat me as if I'm stupid. Emma glanced over her shoulder, a frown on her face. Yes, he's gone. Did you know he was going to leave me here? Yes. Brandi sighed. I can't believe he did this. I don't understand. Emma put down her spatula and faced Brandi. He's worried about you. You're safe here. Zach and his need to protect her. I don't agree. Well, Zach did, and he thought this was for the best. There's nothing you can do about it right now, so you might as well eat a good breakfast, Emma said. Who'd have thought such a sweet woman could be complicit in such double-cross? Brandi wouldn't hold in her anger, but she couldn't take it out on Emma. The woman was doing what she thought was best and she trusted him. Brandi no longer trusted Zach. I'm a grown woman. Yes, but according to Zach you weren't taking the threat seriously, Emma said, putting a plate of food in front of Brandi. Eat. Brandi looked down at the pancakes and her stomach rumbled. She couldn't make a plan until her stomach was full, so she might as well eat. She sighed and dug into the lightest pancakes she'd ever eaten. These are good. Thank you. What are your plans? I'm going to get back to our penthouse. Emma laughed. I admire your honesty, but I've been given strict orders not to let you out of my sight. Thanks for the warning. Brandi's turn to laugh, but her mind was also ready to sort out this problem. I can clean up. You're a guest here. You're welcome to keep me company. Let me get my phone, Brandi said. She searched through her bag, but she was sure she'd left it on the nightstand last night. He took it. He took my phone. Then she remembered she had her personal phone. She dug deeper into her bag and found it. She couldn't turn it on because the battery was dead. Wanting to throw it across the room, she groaned and searched for a charging cable. She returned to the kitchen, her phone in hand. May I charge this somewhere? Sure. There's an outlet right there. In a few minutes, Brandi could use the phone to make travel arrangements. Emma chattered on as she cleaned the kitchen. Brandi listened with half of her brain. The rest was waiting on the phone to charge. Every time she tried to turn it on, nothing happened. What was wrong? When Emma had finished her task, Brandi once again couldn't turn on her phone. My phone isn't charging. This cable is new, so I don't know what's wrong. I don't know. I don't have that type of phone, so I don't have a charger. Let me try another outlet. Emma frowned and Brandi suspected something was up. Is there something wrong with this outlet? Did you have me plug into this one on purpose? Yes. Brandi admired that Emma was being honest with her. Could I please have an outlet that works? For real. Emma pointed to another one and Brandi moved her charging phone. It made the proper sound that told her it was charging for real. She was only 10 minutes behind now, but it was still early. I'm going to pack my stuff. Would you mind helping me with something first? Emma asked. How could she tell this woman that she couldn't? Brandi was on the fence about whether she and Zach had a future at this point, but if they did, she shouldn't make his mother angry. Sure. I need to shop for dinner at the farmer's market down the road, but I have trouble carrying things. Brandi sighed. This wasn't going to be a short task. When do they open? In half an hour. We can leave in 15 minutes and we'll get there when it opens. Sure. I can do that. She had to wait for her phone to charge anyway. The market was a series of stalls that had fruits, vegetables, and homemade items. Emma was in no hurry and Brandi counted to 10 more than once to not hurry her along. She held the basket for Emma as she exchanged gossip with the merchants. The trip would have taken half the time. But this might be Emma's social outlet and Brandi couldn't deny her that just because the woman raised a domineering and boneheaded son. I have pork chops. I could make some applesauce for dinner. These apples look good. I won't be here for dinner. That didn't seem to make Emma pause. She prattled and finally they were headed home. When they returned, Brandi's phone was charged. She downloaded a travel app and booked a flight back to the city. Emma watched her. Please don't be mad at Zach. Brandi glanced at Emma over her phone. How can't I be? He is trying to protect you. I've never seen Zach care about anyone as much as he does you, Emma said. That made Brandi pause. Did Emma know that they weren't engaged for real? It wasn't her place to shatter that illusion with Zach's mother. I don't need to be saved from myself as if I were a child. You matter to him, Brandi. Remember that. Brandi's eyes fell closed for a moment. I'll deal with Zach when I see him. Right now I need to get back there. Emma frowned. Whatever you think is best, Brandi. But I can see how he looks at you and I haven't been privy to much of Zach's dating life. But the fact that he brought you to meet me means something. It means that he had to keep up a facade and get her out of the way at the same time. Brandi squelched her anger. But Zach would get it full force when she saw him again. I'm not going to be passive. I'm getting home and confronting him. You can tell him that or not. I understand that your loyalty is to Zach, but he has no right to try to control my behavior. He can be overbearing. I know that, but it comes from a good place. Brandi was doubting that at the moment. Zach could be up to something, and all of this could be a way to get Brandi out of the way while he was doing it. She hadn't doubted his motives in a long time, but now she did. She hated that she'd given so much of herself to him. She hated that she'd given him her heart. I don't want to talk about it, Emma. I'm sorry. You have been nothing but a gracious hostess, but I have to get back. Emma nodded and left her alone. Brandi made travel arrangements. Then she finished packing her bags and was ready for the car service half an hour later. She found Emma on her back porch. Thank you for your hospitality. You really have to go? It isn't safe. I'll be fine. She hugged the older woman and left her wringing her hands. It was time to get home and confront Zach. Chapter 38. Brandi finds her way home. When the elevator doors opened, Zach couldn't have been more surprised. By the look on Brandi's face, she had worked up a good head of steam on her trip back. His next emotion was that he was impressed. He'd handicapped her as much as he could knowing she was a resourceful woman, but she still managed to escape. He also noted that his mother hadn't warned him that Brandi had left. That was an interesting turn of events. Brandi stormed in and began poking Zach's chest. I don't know who you think you are, buddy, but I am no child. That would be the last thought he'd have about Brandi. She was all woman and maybe more than he could handle. She was certainly challenging him. She was no damsel in distress. I didn't think you were. You left me there. What did you think you were doing? Were you up to something you didn't want me to know about? She advanced towards him and he let her. Now he was backed against the wall, and he felt as if a wildcat was attacking him. She was all claws and accusations. He put up his hands, gently grabbing her finger that was jabbing him. I wasn't up to anything, Brandi. I thought you trusted me. I did until you left me at your mother's house, Brandi said. He decided to let her get it all out. She wasn't ready to listen to him yet. If you weren't doing something wrong, then explain yourself. Are you going to listen to me? She snatched her hand from his grip, crossing her arms over her chest. Go ahead. No, I meant Brandi, if you aren't going to listen, really listen, then I don't want to have this conversation. She tapped her foot, obviously trying to calm herself. She walked away and then came back. Zach stayed where he was but watched her come and go. Eventually she stopped in front of him, her gaze meeting his. I'm ready. He took a chance and put his hands on her arms. She didn't shake him off, but she was stiff at his touch. I'm sorry if you felt I treated you like a child. That wasn't my intention. Then what was your intention? He had to come clean about his feelings. She wouldn't understand otherwise. His mouth went dry at the idea of telling her. He'd never been a coward. He'd been in many tense negotiations, but this felt harder for some reason. I'm waiting. My intention was to keep you safe. I think that we are being targeted by the Mafia. It might be because your father had figured out that you aren't on his side any longer. You have become dangerous to them. Yeah? And what's it to you? Why do you have to be the one to protect me? She wasn't making this easy for him. He sighed. Because Brandi, I care about you. More than just as a coworker. Wait. What? She was going to make him repeat it. I care about you. I don't want to see you hurt. She took a step towards him, her gaze heavy on him. You care about me? Yes. He wouldn't say love, but that's where this was all heading. He'd never been in love before, and these were dangerous waters. He would be something he'd never been before, vulnerable. So you thought that that was reason enough to send me away? Yes, Brandi. I was protecting you. Why couldn't she just see it and they could move on from this conversation? Because I'm weak? Brandi, I was raised old-fashioned. A man protects a woman. Because she's weak. He wanted to shake her. No. Men protect women because they are important. She took a step back, her mouth open. I'm not sure what to do with that information. He smiled down at her, knowing that there was only one thing he should say. I think I'm falling in love with you, Brandi. She didn't make move. She didn't even make a sound, and he wondered if he'd read the situation incorrectly. Wasn't she also having feelings for him? He held his breath. Finally, she looked at him with a passion he hadn't seen before now. Really? He looked down at his feet, then back up at her. Yes, Brandi. Really. You look uncomfortable telling me that. It isn't something I throw around, Brandi. I've never been in love. She cocked her head to one side, a small smile on her face. Was she going to use this against him? He trusted her with some deep feelings and she wasn't saying it back. No, he could handle that. He was a big boy. His only concern was that she wasn't fully on board with him, and she would use this weakness in her favor, to bring him down. He could shove it all aside if his business was threatened, but he'd regret telling her. He'd never say it again to anyone else if that was the case. He held his breath, but then she rubbed up against him. In love, huh? Yes, Brandi, and you are far too amused about this. She laughed, her fingers dancing across his chest, playing with the button in his shirt. Maybe. He growled and took her hand in his. If we're done, I'd like to get some dinner. Done? Oh, I don't think so. The revelation that Zach Wilder had feelings for me can't pass unnoticed. We aren't going to go on with our day as if that isn't huge. Her eyes widened and she put her arms out to her sides to demonstrate how huge. She was having way too much fun with this and he almost regretted telling her. I'm glad you're amused by my emotions, Brandi. Show me. What? He asked. Show me how you feel. With a growl, he scooped her up, spun her around and pushed her against the wall. Her eyes were wild, but the smile on her face told him she liked this. He kissed her with all the passion he possessed. His body was on fire for Brandi. He wanted to crawl inside of her. Bedroom? He asked. Don't care. Condom. Back pocket. He didn't know why he'd put that in his pocket when he'd changed after work today. Something had told him to do it, maybe his instincts. He wasn't completely surprised that Brandi had gotten herself back here, back home. She dug her fingers into his hair as he lifted her skirt. He wanted access. Next time could be sweet and slow. Now was about connection. He tore her panties off of her. She gasped, her tongue finding his and dancing with it. He rained kisses down her neck as he found her tender spot and brought her to the first climax. Her fingers dug into his shirt. When she recovered, her eyes gazed at him, glazed and full of passion. This melding of the two of them held more importance than just doing it in a motel room or even at his mother's house. No, this was cementing something. They were crossing a line that they weren't even going to come back from. His heart beat rapidly as he entered her sheath. Her legs tightened around him and he paused, taking in the profoundness of their mating. This wasn't the first time he'd ever had sex, but he felt like it, as if whatever he'd done before this paled in comparison. Brandi made impatient noises and he began to move. His rhythm fast and wicked. Her body arched into his with each stroke until he could hold back no longer. He emptied himself into Brandi. It wasn't a desperate act but a cathartic one. He was rid of his old habits of not getting involved emotionally with anyone. He was done with that lifestyle. Brandi was his and he would do his best to make her understand that. He hoped he wouldn't regret it. Chapter 39. They make a plan. Brandi was boneless from all of the lovemaking. Zach was inventive and creative, and when they were naked, she might have been the only woman on the planet. She could understand why he was so successful. He went after every task with a dogged determination. She smiled as they lay in bed, remembering that she'd benefited from that focus more than once. Would he run screaming from the room if she told him she had feelings for him? Him falling in love with her hadn't been part of any plan. Her falling in love with him had never entered her mind. She couldn't imagine loving the man that her father had described. Too bad Zach wasn't that man at all. Her father had lied about so many things and she couldn't let that sit. She couldn't let him get away with it. Zach snoozed a little beside her, his body on the bed as if he'd fallen there after their last lovemaking session. His head popped up. "I can hear you thinking." She laughed as she stretched. "Sorry to wake you." He shifted so he was on his side, his hands stacked under his head, those gorgeous eyes staring at her as if they held the answers to the world. "What are you thinking about?" "My father." Zach grimaced. "Did you expect me to say that I was thinking about you?" Brandi said. "No, but I wish you just let the feds deal with him. They have an ongoing investigation. Why don't we bring him down?" Zach blinked. "Us? Yes. We're a great team. We could do this, Zach." He groaned. "Brandi, leave it to the professionals. We're real estate developers. You can't tell me that you haven't thought about it. I've bet you planned for it. Don't try to convince me you haven't." "Why are you so sure I have?" "Because you jumped at the chance for me to work for you. I don't think it was my impressive resume. You wanted dirt on my father and I was the one who had it." He grimaced. "Brandi." She held up her hand to stop him. "No, Zach. I get it. I'm not mad. I would have done the same thing, so I'm not mad. I walked into this situation naive." He rubbed a hand down her back. "I'm sorry, Brandi, that you're in this situation. I'm sorry that your father is such a DCK. Yeah, me too. I wish I'd spotted that sooner. You have no way of knowing. He's had control of your world for a long time. Still, I should have seen something. Looking back, I guess there were signs," she said. He frowned. "Don't beat yourself up, Brandi. Kent is pretty good at manipulation." "He did that to you?" Zach sighed and rolled over onto his back, his arm across his eyes. "Yes. I was young and naive. Tell me what he did." He lifted his arm to look at her. "You sure you want to know?" "I do, Zach. He told me some vague explanation of why you left, but I was still a teenager then. I didn't pay attention." "You wouldn't as a teenager. Tell me what he did, Zach. I want to know it all. I want to know everything I can about my father. He put my name on some projects that I wasn't involved in. I was questioned about them by the cops and it scared the crap out of me. The cops ended up not charging me with anything, but from then on I knew that Kent would make me the fall guy if necessary. In a heartbeat. I kept an eye on everything he was doing, while I was getting my resources lined up to go out on my own. You had a lot going on. I was young. As if you're old now. Your 30s are different than your 20s. I guess I'll find out," Brandi said. Zach put his hand on her cheek, cradling her face. "I wish you would let this go. I'm a woman of action, Zach. Yes, I'm getting that and I appreciate that in working with you, but this is bigger than both of us. More dangerous. Hear me out." He groaned. "You have a plan and you aren't going to let this go, are you?" "No, Zach, so buckle up." He laughed. "I'll listen, but I can't promise that I'll agree to anything." "Fair enough." He shifted his pillow so it was against the headboard and leaned his body on it. He really should put on a shirt because Brandi found him distracting naked. The lines of his muscles flexed as he got himself situated. Her mouth went dry just watching him, but she gathered her thoughts. "Okay. I'm ready for this plan." "Don't make fun," she said. He cradled her face again. "Never. I just don't think you're going to convince me. I appreciate your honesty." He waved at her to continue. She took a breath. "How about I go back to working for my father?" "No." "Zach, hear me out. I'm not letting you go back into that lion's den. If the feds are investigating him, then they could be close to an arrest. You might be collateral damage." She studied him. He was Allen on the idea of protecting her, and there was some part of her that liked it. He'd said she was important, but she was still an independent woman. Letting a man dictate to her was how she'd gotten in this mess. She'd let her father guide her life and hadn't taken control. That's a gamble I'm willing to take. I'm not. You don't have a say in this. He sighed. Please don't do this, Brandi. You're the first woman I've ever had feelings for. I don't want to lose you. Her heart stopped for a moment. That was a lot of soul-bearing for a guy like Zach. She swallowed around the emotion his word invoked in her. We'll never be free of him if we leave this to someone else. Zach rubbed a hand down his face. I can't talk you out of this, can I? No, so you might as well help me so the plan is as foolproof as possible. He sighed. Go ahead. I'm still not promising anything. She shifted so she was sitting cross-legged on the bed, the sheet wrapped around her a little. I need to get back to working with him. If I go back to him without the information, I'll be useless to Dad. He'll ignore me. He might do what he did to me and put your name on things that you aren't involved in. You can't chance that. You could go to jail, Brandi, Zach said. She shook her head. I can be careful and I'll figure out where everything is. Even if I've never looked before because he kept me in the dark, I won't miss anything now. Since I know the truth, things he says to me will be more significant. You think he'll take you back? No questions asked. If I return to him defeated, as if I was unable to do what he asked, he'll be disappointed and he'll give me busy work. He will most likely forget I'm there. Zach grimaced. You're his daughter. I don't think he'll forget. Well, it seems like he could easily. He was all over the idea of me sleeping with you to get information. Could you imagine saying that to your daughter if you had one? I'd sooner cut off the other guy's DCK than have my daughter sleep with him. Brandi laughed. She hoped that Zach did have a daughter because he'd protect her with his life, just like how he wanted to do with Brandi. Sadly, my father doesn't feel that way, and apparently I've been a disappointment and now I'll be cementing it in his mind that I'm useless. I'm sorry he doesn't see you for who you are. Not your fault, Zach. How do we pull this off then? Not that I'm agreeing to it, but tell me more. We're going to break up. Chapter 40, The Breakup. Brandi let that settle into Zach's brain for a moment. She knew he would balk, but if he just heard her out he'd understand it was the best way. Break up. Zach had gone a little pale, and that made Brandi wonder if his feelings were a little more than he said they were. Her heart leaped and she stifled a smile because this titan of industry had wormed his way into her heart. She wasn't ready to say it out loud. There was a small part of her that still believed he might be playing her, but she didn't put much credence in that idea. Zach had been nothing but a gentleman, and had only taken their relationship to the physical level when she'd initiated it. He'd even said he had feelings for her, but he hadn't illuminated how deep they were. She'd felt a change in how they'd had sex. It had been less about sex and more about connecting, which told her that he wasn't lying about his feelings. Yes, Zach. If we aren't broken up and I return to my apartment in my father's company, he'll be suspicious. Zach blinked and Brandi let him digest it all. It wasn't as if they were in a true relationship. At least they hadn't talked about one, but her heart was full that Zach wasn't agreeing to this quickly. Explain this to me like I'm 5. If we break up publicly it will look real. I'll return to my father's company with my tail between my legs, and tell him I was unable to complete the assignment. He won't give me another chance and most likely he'll just ignore me. That gives me free rein to find what we need to bring him down. Zach put a hand on my cheek, cradling my face. What makes you think that you'll find something that others haven't? Because I know my father better than anyone. Zach's eyebrows went up. Really? Brandi laughed. Okay, I didn't know that he was crooked, but still I think I can figure out where he hides things. Zach studied Brandi and she held her breath. His opinion shouldn't matter to her, but it did. He was a smart man, good at business. He was also a good man, something her father wasn't. She'd learned more about the real estate industry in the days she'd been with Zach than she had in years at her father's company. You're sure? I can't keep you safe there. At least not as safe as I can here. I don't think my father would let something happen to me under his own roof. It brings too much suspicion on him. Zach rubbed the stubble on his chin. A thrill went through Brandi as she remembered the places those whiskers had chafed on her body during their lovemaking. She mentally shook herself. They were talking business here. She should keep her head about her. Zach frowned. You might have a point. The best I can do is let you know who my mole is. If you get into trouble you can contact him. Okay, I'll take that information. We can work together. You're sure about this? I can't talk you out of this. No, Zach. My mind is made up. He nodded. Okay, I'll text you Fred's contact information. Fred? As in my father's accountant. You know him. Brandi nodded and chose not to embarrass herself by letting on that she'd asked Fred for advice on how to seduce Zach. Yeah, I know him. Good. I'll let him know what's going on before you leave. Where are you dumping me? She laughed but was happy that Zach was letting her plan play out. He trusted her. Let's go to a high-profile restaurant where we'll be on display. Torta. It was a high-end French restaurant where everyone ate to be seen. The food was good also. That works. Can you get reservations? He gave her a look that said she shouldn't doubt him. Really? You did some favor for him. He leaned in and kissed her nose. I know a lot of people, Brandi. I'm getting that impression. For dinner that night, they had a table by the window at Torta where everyone could see them. They'd agreed not to touch each other and to barely look at each other when they were seated. Zach was a well-known enough person that people would begin to watch them if they thought there'd be a scene. Brandi's heart raced in her chest. She had her bags packed at home, but she hadn't wanted to leave. Would Zach let her come back when this was all done? They hadn't talked about what would happen after, but she couldn't stop thinking about it. How strong were Zach's feelings for her she didn't know. She'd wanted to ask, but hadn't wanted to seem desperate. She wasn't sure how she was going to eat this meal with the butterflies in her stomach. She'd never considered herself a drama queen, and she was about to make a giant scene. It'll be okay, Brandi, Zach whispered. I know. This was my idea. Second thoughts. None that are worth stopping this plan. Okay, then it's showtime. She gulped some wine. Their plan was for Brandi to accuse him of cheating. Zach had grimaced, but he hadn't been able to come up with a better subject to argue about. So who was that woman who sent that text? She's a business associate, Brandi. She put heart emojis at the end of it. I can't explain that, but I have no interest in her, sweetheart. I asked you to marry me. Then why did I find someone's lipstick on your collar? Zach threw down his menu. You are the most jealous person on the planet. That was your lipstick. No, it isn't my color. Zach glanced around. You're making a scene. You'd like me to keep my mouth shut. I think everyone should know exactly who you are. Brandi, Zach said between clenched teeth. They are finding out who you are. Are you going to be faithful to me ever? She asked, a sob in her voice. She'd put down her menu and in her peripheral vision, she could see that some of the tables around them had stopped to watch their exchange. Good. This part of her plan was working. I've been faithful to you despite your repeated accusations. They are getting old, Brandi. Some of the staff were walking by slowly. Yeah? Well, maybe if I could trust you. He put up his hands in surrender. That's your issue. You're saying it's all in my head. You take that any way you want. You're going to anyway. So this is all in my head? Yes, Brandi, it is. She jumped up from her chair. Zachary Wilder. You are the most insufferable man I've ever met. She tugged the ring off of her finger, and even though it hadn't ever been a real engagement, she felt the loss of it immediately. She slammed the ring down on the table. I'm done with you. I'm leaving. I'll have my bags packed tonight. Run back to Daddy, Brandi. That had been his addition when they'd planned what they would say, and Brandi had been delighted by it. The sympathy would be with her, but he would be left with the aftermath in the restaurant. She spun away from him and left the restaurant. She had the host hail a taxi and climbed in, wiping tears from her eyes. Her performance had been pure acting, but because she wasn't sure what the future held for her and Zach, her tears were real. Chapter 41. Where's Brandi? Zach woke knowing something was wrong. The feeling nagged at him as he readied for work and followed him to the office. He wanted to trust that Brandi could take care of herself and that her father wouldn't do anything stupid, but he wasn't so sure. The man was in a desperate situation, and if he had any idea that his daughter had turned away from him, he'd be in even worse straits. Zach stared at his computer. Kendra came in several times to look at him. She finally sat down. What gives? He glanced at her, then shrugged. You miss her already, Kendra said. He did, but not just for the reasons that Kendra thought. You want to talk about it? No thanks. I'd rather not rehash a very public breakup. You are the talk of social media right now. Zach rubbed his eyes. He didn't care who was gossiping. He just wanted to know where Brandi was. They agreed on radio silence for a day, but he was going to break that because of this feeling in his gut. Can you excuse me, Kendra? I have some calls to make before we go over our schedule. She left him, glancing back one more time before she closed the door. He hadn't liked deceiving Kendra, but for the plan to work with Brandi he'd needed to. Zach's phone rang. Fred. This wasn't good. Fred wouldn't call him unless necessary. He'd been briefed on the plan and was to look out for Brandi. Zach trusted the man with his life but hadn't liked relinquishing so much control to someone else. Hey Zach. Tell me what's going on there. Well, I haven't been able to see Brandi. She avoiding you? Not that I can tell, but I think that there's something wrong. The whole atmosphere here has changed. I've seen more signs of the mob visiting Marsing and my gut is telling me they are making some huge move. Then we need to get Brandi out of there. I'll do it, but it will blow my cover. Zach rubbed his chin. He didn't like any of this. I'm coming over. I'd rather you stay put. If you can get a message to Brandi, let her know I'm getting her out. It's been one day. I don't care. I'll figure out what to do after she's out of there. Fred sighed. You might undo everything I've done. That doesn't matter. The feds are investigating and I'll have to leave it to them. Brandi is my first concern. Okay. What do you want me to do? Get a message to her, but if you can't, don't worry. Make yourself scarce so no one thinks there is a connection between us, Zach said. He couldn't drive to Marsing's compound fast enough. He took the sports car in case he had to make a quick exit, which he suspected he would. She lived in a cottage behind the main house and Zach was able to get near it before he was stopped. The cottage sat in the woods and had a windy driveway to it, which was blocked. Zach contemplated driving past it and circling back. He wasn't experienced at this, but he had to get Brandi out of there. Zach chose to drive past and park out of the way. No one should be able to see his car from the cottage or the main house. The fact that the driveway had been blocked told him that was where Marsing was keeping his daughter. He'd probably wanted her away from the main house so no one would know she was there. Zach doubted it was for her safety. He crept through the woods until he saw a man with a large gun patrolling the forest. Zach stepped behind a tree until the man passed. He was out of his depth, but he had run out of options. With Brandi in that house, he had no choice but to save her. She'd become too important to him in a short period of time to leave her to her father's mercies. Zach waited another minute, then moved closer to the house. That's when Kent Marsing stepped out of the woods. He had a gun pointed at Zach, whose heart stopped for a moment. He'd never been involved in violence and now his rival was going to kill him. Not if Zach had any say in the matter. Did you think you could sneak onto my property? I was only thinking about Brandi. Ah, thinking with your DCK, I see. More like his heart, but Zach wasn't going to argue semantics with the man. He held the gun, so he held the power. Let me see her, Kent. You know she's innocent in all of this. When she took up with you, she turned her back on me. Zach wasn't sure how to take that. The engagement had been fake from the beginning, and as far as Kent knew, it was real so Brandi could gather information about Zach. She's still your daughter. Right. What are you going to do with her? I know a mob boss who wants her for himself. You'd sell your daughter? Zach asked, his heart stopping in his chest once again. She hasn't been much use to me in any other capacity. She might as well be a whore. Zach stifled a gasp as he saw red. He tamped down his anger. If Kent couldn't see how valuable his daughter was as a person, then Zach wasn't going to be able to convince him. He certainly wouldn't hear in the woods with a gun pointed at him. Let me see her. Kent laughed. You've become soft, Zach. I never thought I'd see it. Some tale has you in the woods trying to save her. At this moment, Zach wouldn't want to be anywhere else because he'd been moving closer and closer to Kent as they talked. The arm holding the gun had lowered a bit and Zach searched for an opening. No doubt there were others in the woods, so even if he got the jump on Kent, he wouldn't be on top for long. Zach would take that chance anyway. Brandi was worth it. A noise startled Kent and Zach took advantage of the distraction and lunged at the man. He took Kent by surprise and they both fell to the ground. Zach was younger and had a few more pounds on Kent, but the man was scrappy. No one came to help him and finally Zach was on top. Kent punched Zach in the stomach and threw him off. Zach hadn't been able to get the gun away from Kent and he chose to turn and run towards the cottage. He'd get Brandi no matter what. A shot rang out and Zach felt a burning in his side. Crap. He'd been shot. Knowing that he would be no help to Brandi if he was hurt, Zach detoured and headed back to the car, cradling his side. Get him. If he gets to a hospital and tells them where he was shot, the place will be crawling with cops, Kent said. Zach zigzagged and was able to avoid the men that Kent had sent after him. He started the car and shifted into reverse in time to see some men exit the woods. Thankfully the car was able to gain traction and was out of range of the shots before they could do any damage, but his side hurt like crazy. He held his hand over the wound as he drove with the other hand, his mind worrying with how he was going to get Brandi out. As much as Zach hated asking for help, he might have to involve the cops this time. When he arrived at the hospital, he pulled up in front of the emergency department and passed out. Chapter 42. Escape. Fred was the first friendly face Brandi had seen since she'd arrived back at her father's house. Her father had not been happy to see her, and he'd taken her alleged failure with Zach personally. This was not how she'd thought this would pan out at all. Her father was keeping her locked in her cottage with men roaming the grounds around it. She'd heard a shot but had no idea what happened, and none of the guards inside would tell her anything. Something told her it was Zach, but she didn't want to think that way. She was too busy trying to figure a way out of there. Fred had waltzed into her house and barked orders. There's been an intruder and Kent wants everyone over to the western part of the property. He was last seen there. The men scurried out. Is everything okay? Brandi asked. Fred grabbed her hand. I'm getting you out of here. You'll blow your cover, Fred. It's fine. I'm past needing it, Brandi. As much as she wanted out of here and back to Zach, she wanted answers also. She knew she could trust Fred, but she still had questions. What's going on? Just suffice it to say that it will be better that you aren't here right now. Fred. Can we go and I'll explain what I can in the car? She followed him out to what could only be described as a nondescript sedan. It looked like a government-issued vehicle, and she knew her father didn't have anything like that in his fleet. Maybe there was more to Fred than just being a mole for Zach. She climbed in and Fred used a back exit to get her out of the compound. Fred put a hand on her arm when they were a few miles away. Zach's been shot. She put a hand over her mouth, her heart already in pain. What happened? He's fine. Promise you. He sent me a text a little while ago. Where is he? Can you take me there? Yes. We're going to the hospital right now. He's fine, Brandi. She bit her lip. I won't believe it until I see him. That's what we figured, and it was good timing to get you out of there anyway. My plan didn't work how I expected it to. It's fine, Brandi. There's a lot more going on than you think, so don't worry about it, Fred said. He parked the car in the hospital deck and then led Brandi to Zach's room. He was sitting up in a hospital bed and Brandi ran to him. She hugged him and he made a sound, so she stepped away. Did I hurt you? Yes, but it's okay, Brandi. It's just a flesh wound, Zach said. She studied him. He looked okay. His color was good, but he was wincing as he moved. Where were you shot? The bullet grazed my side. Thankfully your father is a crappy shot. He raised his arm. Come here. This is my good side. She tucked herself into him on that side, sitting next to him on the bed. He had a shirt on, but it wasn't one she recognized. I'm getting out of here in a little bit. David's coming to get me. Can I drive your car back? Fred asked. I have someone doing that. Fred laughed. Darn. So what happened after I left? Zach asked. I got Brandi and we're here. You blew your cover, Zach said. Fred looked around the room, then closed the door. This has to stay in this room. Brandi looked at Zach, but he didn't seem to have any idea what was going on. Fred. Fred produced a business card from his pocket. This might explain a little. Zach studied, and as Brandi looked at it also. Wait. You're an FBI agent. Fred nodded at Brandi. Okay, buddy. There is more to you than I thought. I befriended you back in college, and then I was approached by the FBI because of our friendship. You were our initial target, but when I found nothing and you asked me to be a mole in Marsing's organization, we shifted the investigation that way. Holy crap, buddy. I never knew. You weren't supposed to, Zach. Why are you revealing this now? Zach asked. Because our investigation is almost over. That's why I need all of this to stay in this room. You can trust us, Brandi said. I know. Now I have some paperwork to do, and then we launch the next step. But I'm not going to reveal that. Zach held out his hand to Fred. If you need anything for the investigation, let me know. Fred shook Zach's hand. I appreciate it. Fred left. Brandi sat in silence for a moment. They must be close to arresting my father. I'm sorry, Brandi. Not your fault, Zach. The nurse came in with discharge instructions, and Brandi and Zach were in the car moments later with David driving. Zach rested his head against the back of the seat. Did they give you some pain pills? Yeah, and I have a prescription for me. Who knew something so small could hurt so damned much? Zach said. We'll be home in a little bit, Brandi said. Zach tucked her into him on his good side. You seemed very concerned when you first came into the room. I was. Fred had said you were shot. I was worried. He kissed the top of her head. I like that you were concerned. Brandi glanced at the front of the car. Can we have this conversation later? Sure. When they were in the elevator later, Zach brought Brandi's reaction up again. You seemed more than worried. You're fishing, Zach. I am. She laughed, her chin resting on his chest as she looked up at him. What is it you want to know? Why were you so concerned about me? She bit her lip. Because you were hurt. It was more than that. Was she ready to reveal all of this to Zach? I have feelings for you, Zach. She said it and the world didn't end. Nothing came crashing down. Zach didn't laugh. She felt stronger now. I think I love you, Zach. If I could bend down, I'd kiss you. She went up on her tiptoes and brushed her lips against his. He hadn't said it back, but that was okay. She could wait until he was ready. This would be more of a revelation coming from him than from her. He would be less likely to want to be vulnerable than she would. Brandi. His eyes darkened with passion. We can't do that. You're hurt. I'm not hurt there. You are incorrigible. And you love me. She laughed. You going to use that against me? I use anything to my advantage, Brandi. She laughed. I'll have to change the dressing on that when we get home. That'll mean I'll be shirtless. That isn't far from naked. Her smile hurt her face. Maybe it would be good to do something to forget about the day they'd had. To have Zach inside of her would make her forget about her father for a time. You're contemplating it. I can see it on your face, Brandi. The elevator doors opened and Brandi led him to the master bath. Sit and I'll look at that wound. Yes, Nurse Brandi. His eyes lit up as he settled himself on the edge of the tub. I'm sure I could find a nurse's outfit for you to wear. I could be the incorrigible patient that you have to climb into bed to get me to do anything. You'd be wearing nothing but your nurse's cap. They don't wear caps anymore. All the better. Let me do this, then we can negotiate for the sex, Brandi said, setting down the first aid kit next to Zach. The way he looked at her had her blood boiling. She knew she wouldn't turn him down. The logistics were the problem. Could they do this without hurting him? I think we can work this out, Brandi. Chapter 43. Brandi returns to her father's house. For the first time in all the lovemaking they'd done, Zach fell asleep first. Brandi would have loved to snuggle up against him and close her eyes, but she had a mission. She still had to bring down her father, and even though her original plan hadn't worked, she felt she was best suited to make this happen. She slid out of the bed as slowly as she could. Zach only stirred once, but he didn't wake up. The wound must have taken a piece out of his energy. The sex did too, even if she'd been on top for the duration. That hadn't been her plan, to tire him out and then leave, but she took advantage of it. She found her clothing and her phone and sent a text to Fred. I'm coming in to see you. Okay. Does Zach know? No, but I'll leave him a note. Okay. I'll send the address for my office. Brandi stood in front of the elevator debating if she should call David to drive her. Her car was at her father's. She didn't want David to get into any trouble. She could call a car service and she wasn't hiding where she was going. That decided, she scrawled a note for Zach to find, then left the penthouse. She didn't know if she'd be back, so she gave it one last glance before the elevator doors closed. She had big plans for her father's company when he went to jail, and the first was to make it legit. She'd be competing with Zach, but that didn't scare her. This was her legacy to make for herself. Fred's office was in a building with other government offices. Brandi had to go through a metal detector. And then she found him sitting behind a large desk with a view of an alley. Her father's office in a high-rise would work nicely for her, assuming he still had it. Fred. He came around his desk and kissed her on the cheek. I'm glad you could come. What did you tell Zach? You are friends. Yes. As I said in the hospital, I was recruited because of that. And my accounting skills, he said when he sat back behind his desk. What a small world that you and I became friendly. I knew you were innocent, Brandi. I'm in law enforcement. We serve and protect, and I knew you needed to trust me before I could protect you. She nodded. Thank you. So what brings you here? Without Zach. Something he might not approve of. I got that impression, Fred said, laughing. His demeanor was different in his office than when he was working for her father. He seemed more open now. I'm going to return to my father's compound. What I need to know from you is what happens when he is arrested. What happens to the company? Yes. Will there be anything left? She asked. Fred sighed. Any assets of your father and the company will be seized. Since you aren't under any suspicion, anything in your name will be left alone. She cocked her head. There are things in my name? Yes. It's a common thing for criminals to do. Often if a man thinks he is going to be arrested, he'll transfer items to his wife's name or divorce her, and give her those things during the settlement. That way they aren't lost, and when he gets out of jail, he can reclaim them. Wow. So my father has put things in my name to save them from you guys. I'm not supposed to divulge this, but yes. Can you give me the information on that? Brandi asked. This would give her something to start with. She could rebuild the company the way she wanted after her father was arrested. She could make her own way in the world. Zach had shown her that she was smart and resourceful. He'd made sure she'd known how valuable she was. I'm not supposed to, Brandi. It's part of an ongoing investigation. She frowned. Can you send me in a direction so I can find it? He patted a folder in front of him. I can't reveal what's in here. Not until we arrest Kent. Okay. He patted the folder again. I need to use the restroom. He rose and touched the folder again, and she finally understood what he was trying to communicate to her. Okay. He left and she waited 10 seconds before she opened the folder. Her father had done a thorough job and she didn't remember signing anything, but obviously she had. She took a picture of the papers with her phone. The accounts had her father's address on them. The level of betrayal was staggering. She was back in her seat when Fred returned. He smiled at her. Is there anything else I can do for you? No. You've done a lot, thanks. I'm willing to testify and give you whatever information I glean when I return to his compound. We appreciate that, though it may not be necessary. There is still the Mafia to contend with, Brandi. Are you sure you want to go there? I can't protect you since I've officially quit your father's company. Is his arrest imminent? Soon. I won't give you a date or time. I understand. She rose. Thanks for everything, Fred. So I can't talk you out of returning? I want to save what I can for myself. If it's in my name, I'm going to consider it mine. She left him and headed to the bank where most of the accounts were held. She was escorted into an office near the back. A woman rose and greeted her. Miss Marsing. How nice to meet you. Thank you, Miss Garrett. What can I do for you today? I'd like to remove my father's signatory powers from these accounts. She transferred the account numbers to a piece of paper that she now slid across the desk to Miss Garrett. The woman studied the paper, then typed on her computer. This is a little unusual. Your father is primary on the accounts. Then I'll open new accounts and transfer whatever I need over. Okay. This will take a few minutes. I have time. Brandi didn't have a story for why she was doing this. She hoped that the bank wouldn't check with her father. She hadn't thought about that until right now. The woman didn't leave her sight, so she knew Miss Garrett hadn't called her father, at least not yet. It didn't matter. The money was transferred. She left the minimum needed to keep the accounts open. When she left the bank, she had paperwork to prove to her father that the money was now truly in her name. She didn't want to help him avoid arrest, but she had a brief thought of having him sign over the company to her. Then she changed her mind. She would start from scratch. She would make her own company, one that didn't have the taint of the Mafia on it. Her father was on the phone when she strode into his office. He hurried off the call, then looked at her. You came back. I did. She was in a position of power now. She could use this money how she saw fit, but she needed, for her own personal reasons, to prove to her father that she wasn't useless. She laid the bank paperwork on his desk. This time I'm taking what's mine. He glanced over the paperwork. It's all dirty money. She hadn't thought about that. It's my money. You'd keep dirty money? She didn't know if he was telling the truth or not, but she wasn't going to believe him. I'm not giving it back to you, Dad. Things are going to be different around here from now on. He leaned back in his chair. You think you can come in here and order me around? Looks like you need me more than I need you. I'm sure the Mafia would love to know about these accounts. You'd give up the money to get to me? Kent asked. She didn't hesitate. If she needed to start from scratch, she would. Yes. What father prostitutes his daughter? You told me to sleep with Zach Wilder. I'll never forgive you for that. It was your only use. She held back the gasp. Why hadn't she seen that her father was horrible? She loved him because she couldn't turn that off so easily, but she didn't like him. I have talents that you've never seen. Did Zach fill your head with those ideas? Is he behind this? She laughed. You really can't see my value, can you? No, this is my idea. Zach knows nothing about it. Don't think that because you're head of the company he won't try to take it over. Zach is business first. She would worry about that another day. She gathered her papers up and tucked them back into her briefcase. Are you in? In. Are you going to stay here if I take over the company? He laughed. Take over the company? I'm so far in debt to the Mafia, they won't let you do it. She shrugged. Fine. I'll start my own then. She spun on her heel and strode towards the door. They'll never let you get away with it. It's their money. She glanced over her shoulder. That will no longer be your problem. When Brandi stepped out of the house she'd grown up in, she knew it was for the last time. Fred stood by his nondescript sedan. Is it time? She asked. It is. Thanks for letting me do that. Not a problem. He'll be locked up within the... Chapter 44. A revelation. Brandi only had one place to go. She had only one person she wanted to share this with. Zach was the only one who could understand this victory. He would also be the only person concerned about her, as she hadn't let anyone else in on the secret she was keeping. When the elevator doors opened, Zach was standing there. He had on pants, but his shirt was unbuttoned and he wore no shoes. The bandage on his side was coated in red. Zach. Brandi. What happened? Where did you go? Brandi took his arm and led him to the master bath. What did you do? I hope you didn't open the stitches. Sit. Never mind that. Why did you leave? He asked, his eyes wild. I had to go see my father? What? What were you thinking? It's okay, Zach. I'm here. I tugged on his arm. Put this up so I can get to your wound. He did, but his interrogation wasn't over. Tell me, Brandi. She sighed. Okay. She related what had happened and slowly he relaxed and a smile appeared on his face. I'm proud of you standing up to your father. The FBI agents came to arrest him and now I have that money, because it was in my name and I'm not suspected of anything, it's mine. I owe Fred a lot. She took off his bandage, but Zach's stitches were intact. They just pulled a little. No sex for you until this heals. He flashed a pout at her, but she wasn't going to give in. No matter how much she loved the man, he needed to heal before they got naked again. I'll be fine. Zach, she said. You're heady with the power, aren't you? He said, then laughed. He winced when he laughed. Zach, just be a good patient. So what are you going to do with the money? The company too, she said. What? I own a chunk of the company, but those assets are frozen, so I'm going to start my own company. She paused, straightening. You don't mind some competition, do you? Not at all. She went back to dressing his wound. Are you set on starting your own company? He asked. She glanced at him. What do you mean? I want to be out from under my father. I get that, Brandi. That's admirable. I wouldn't want this newfound independence to go to waste or anything. She retaped the bandage over his side, then sat down on the edge of the tub next to him. If he was willing to give her advice, she wasn't going to turn it down. Zach was one of the smartest men she knew. Then what are you suggesting? Don't be set on one path yet. When you figure out exactly what is the best way to spend that money, well then full steam ahead. He kissed her nose and winced because he had to bend down to do it. I am proud of you, showing your father your moxie. She laughed. Thanks. Do you have suggestions? He rose and held out his hand. I'm hungry. Let's talk about this while we make breakfast. She liked the sound of that. Was Zach becoming domestic? Let me make breakfast. I'm injured, but I'm not an invalid, Brandi. She took his hand and followed him to the kitchen. I know you're not an invalid, but you're still healing and our bedroom activities pulled those stitches. He stopped. You're worried about me. Of course. I've told you that I love you, Zach. That's all part of that. Yeah, I guess this is all new to me. What is? She asked, pulling breakfast items from the refrigerator. Being in a relationship, he said, pulling a pan out of the cabinet. She stopped and stared at him. He gently took the items from her. You're looking at me in disbelief. You said that we're in a relationship. He smiled. Yes, we are, Brandi. Is that a problem? She laughed. No, I'm just surprised. Well, we are. Exclusive. Meaning we don't see anyone else? She asked. Just for clarification. He turned a burner on under a pan and looked back at her. He hadn't buttoned his shirt and she thought the look was particularly sexy on him. No shoes, just jeans and an open shirt. It made her mouth go dry. Yes, exclusive. I don't want anyone else to get to see you naked. Okay. We good? Can we talk about business? She smiled. Sure. She was in a relationship with Zach Wilder. He'd been her crush when she was a kid. Now he was her man. Her partner. She took a moment to absorb it all. For once she didn't have to worry about if someone was with her because of her money. Zach had plenty of his own. I can hear you thinking, he said. Sorry. No apology necessary. Just let me in. What's going on in that beautiful head of yours? She smiled up at him as he placed bacon strips into the heated pan. I'm just taking it all in. You've been a surprise from the beginning, Zach. My father had me convinced you were the boogeyman. You are anything but. He laughed. I'm glad. Now business. She shook herself. Yes, business. What are your suggestions? He shifted the bacon around the pan. These are just suggestions. You don't have to do any of them. She leaned on the counter next to the stove. Spill it, Zach. Okay, you could start your own company. That's not a bad idea and you'd be successful. Got that? You could buy into my company. What? He shrugged. We could be 50-50 partners. Wait, you would sell half your company to me. Yeah, why is that surprising? You have great instincts and I trust you with my life. More importantly, I trust you with my money. She didn't know what to say. That was a high compliment from a man who built the company from scratch. So we'd be equal partners. That's what 50-50 means, Brandi. But you built that company, Zach. I can't do that. Why not? I'm not giving it to you. If I did that, I'd only give you 30%. I want to keep controlling interest. Besides, if I did that, you'd still have to figure out what to do with the money. She blinked at him. You'd give me part of your company. You sound like an echo. Yes, Brandi. He stopped what he was doing and braced his hands on the counter on either side of her. Listen to me. I would love to do business with you, Brandi Marsing. You are smart and would be an asset to the company. And I'd get to see you all the time. Her gaze went up to his and held it. You're serious? As a bullet wound. She laughed and rested her hands on his naked chest. Okay, I'll buy half of your company. Good. Why? Why are you doing this? For purely personal reasons. Such as, I'm doing it because I don't want you to leave. I'm doing it because it's a smarter move to have you on my side than to have you competing with me. And well, because I love you, Brandi Marsing. Chapter 45. A Real Date. Zach's words couldn't have made Brandi any happier. She hadn't dared to hope that Zach felt the same as she did, but now she knew. He took her into his arms and she was careful with his wound, but she melted into him. It was as if she belonged in his arms. She never wanted to let him go. Even if she didn't know what the future held, she would cherish this time she had with him. For the first time in her life, a man actually saw who she was, saw her worth. She wasn't willing to let that go easily. I'm going to burn our breakfast, Zach said. She released him but didn't move away. He plated the food and handed her one of them. Let's go on a date. What? She asked. A date? Yeah, let's do this right from now on. I know you're living here and all that, but let me woo you. You deserve that. Woo me? Sounds old-fashioned. It is, he said, sitting at the breakfast bar. You deserve to be wined and dined, Brandi. She sat down next to him, studying the man as he ate. Wined and dined? Yes. Why is this so hard for you to grasp? You already know I love you. We've already had a lot of sex. What is the point? Let's reset this relationship, Brandi. Let's spend some time together that doesn't include working, or trying to bring down your father. He was serious. He wanted to take her on a date. A date. She warmed to the idea. Okay, I'll let you. Good. I'll let Kendra know that we aren't coming in today. We're doing this now? Today. Yes, Brandi. I know the day is half over and we're having breakfast for lunch, but I can pull it off. Trust me. She did trust him. With her life, in fact, and clearly her heart too. Okay. Let me eat and give me half of an hour. Do you have casual clothing? My stuff is still at my cottage. He waved a hand. Well, start with shopping, then we'll do the date. She put on a power suit before visiting her father. She guessed it was appropriate for whatever Zach had in mind. Where are we going? That, my dear, is a surprise. David was driving them to a store 15 minutes later. Despite Brandi's insistence, Zach bought her a pair of jeans and a shirt. She put them on and they were off on their date out in the country, back to that land on top of the hill. Brandi climbed out of the car after Zach. David drove off, but there was a tent and a table set up. What's all of this? You'll see in a few minutes, Zach said. He pulled champagne from an ice bucket, pouring them each a glass. Should you be drinking on pain medication? I didn't take any today, he said. Aren't you in pain? He shrugged. I'm enjoying your company too much to notice. She smiled. That was very charming. She glanced down the driveway and saw a truck turn into it. A food truck? She wasn't sure, but when it rolled to a stop beside the tent, she saw that it was a taco truck. She looked at Zach for an explanation. I wanted something else, but they were the only truck available. I can't remember the last time I had a taco. The window on the side rolled open. We need a few minutes to set up, then we can take your orders. Is this all for us? Brandi asked. All for us. Tacos and champagne. I can't say I've ever had them together, let alone on a date. She clapped her hands and laughed. Zach could be spontaneous and she liked how his mind worked. Maybe we'll make it a new trend. He sat on the chair and she'd never seen him so relaxed. The man had been shot just yesterday and here he was taking her on a date. The truck made them tacos and then left. The day was perfect for eating outside and the tent kept the sun off of them so they weren't too hot. Did you really pull this off in 15 minutes? Zach put down his taco. 25 minutes because I had trouble with the food truck. This was sweet and fun. The day isn't over yet, he said. There's more. He took her hand in his. I don't do dates halfway, Brandi. Especially not for someone I love. Hearing Zach say he loved her would never get old. She smiled. Did you close on this place? I paid cash, so we closed the day after he accepted my offer. Are you going to build a house here? He set his champagne glass down on the table. He rose and held out his hand. Let me show you my plans. He walked her to one end of the property. Here is where the house will be. You'll have a great view of the valley. I will. He pointed. The master bedroom will have the best view. But the terrace will have a good one also. Tell me more. It'll have 5 bedrooms. 4 children. He laughed. I just fell in love for the first time. Don't have me married and raising children just yet. I hadn't meant with me, Zach. I'm not in any hurry. She waved a hand. What else? I want a pool. I like to swim for exercise and I don't always get to do it. It'll be heated. Sounds wonderful. Put a roof over it for rainy days. What a great idea. Thanks. She was warming to the idea of this house. Maybe she'd build one for herself. When he was done describing his house, he looked down at her. What do you think? I think you'll be lonely all by yourself in a house that big. He laughed and kissed the top of her head. You ready for our next adventure? She guessed it was time because David was pulling up the driveway. She looked at Zach. Any hints? Nope. She never would have guessed that he chartered a boat to take them around the harbor. This was turning out to be the best date she'd ever been